Hello and welcome to another episode of Anticipating CSICon 2024, my series publicizing this year's conference of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The conference is called CSICon and it'll take place in Las Vegas from October 24th through the 27th. Today's guest, Professor Timothy Caulfield, is one of the CSICon scheduled speakers. Welcome, Tim. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, Rob. Really looking forward to this.
I should have said thanks again for joining me because this is our second get together for one of these. I interviewed you before you spoke at CSICon 2 years ago. And I think you spoke a previous time before I was doing these.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to be on again. I like to think of this as my community. So it's nice to have the opportunity to chat with you about things I'm really passionate about.
So for those who don't know your background, let me read some bio about you. Some I got from the CSICon speaker site. That was rather sparse, so I actually embellished it a bit with other sources online. So please correct me if any of this is wrong. So it says Timothy Caulfield is a professor in the Faculty of Law and the School of Public Health and research director of the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta. He was the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy for over 20 years. I believe last time you were still in that position and you've moved on, right?
Yeah, the chair just ran out. I rode that horse as long as I could take it. I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
So it also says that your interdisciplinary research on topics such as stem cells, genetics, research ethics, the public representation of science, and public health policy have allowed you to publish over 400 academic articles. That number more or less right?
That's about right, I think, in that zone anyway.
You're the author of 2 national bestsellers, The Cure for Everything, Untangling the Twisted Messages About Health, Fitness, and Happiness, and my still favorite, Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything? And your most recent book is?
Relax, damn it.
I like that title too. The subtitle I found, A User's Guide to the Age of Anxiety. As we talked about last time, subtitles sometimes change, and even the titles change, right, depending on where it's published?
That's right. That's right. Different countries, different titles.
So you are the host of the Netflix 12-episode documentary, A User's Guide to Cheating Death, which streamed, as far as I can tell, in over 60 countries. And you have numerous honors, including being elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, and last but not least, Fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. Also,
Go
in
team.
2020, I was there when you were awarded the Bell's Prize for Critical Thinking by the Center for Inquiry. And in 2022, you became a member of the Order of Canada. I believe you're my first guest who is ever a member of the Order of Canada. What is that?
I think it's Canada's version of, I guess, being like knighted or something. But let's say a step down.
The first time we talked, some of the things we talked about were that I was flabbergasted that you were both a scientist and a lawyer, and I had never met anyone or talked to anyone at any length for sure about that subject. So please explain to our viewers how that mashup happened, and how do you use that in your work, both the law and science?
Well, it's interesting because I really for the last couple decades, I don't think of myself as a law professor so much as I do as a interdisciplinary researcher. So right out of the gate, as soon as I became a professor, I was very, very lucky to have incredible mentors. Mentors, so important, am I right? And they were scholars that really did take this interdisciplinary path. People like Bertha Maria Knoppers, and so right out of the gate, Rob, I started working with scientists and social scientists and people from the humanities on these complex, mostly health policy issues, science policy issues, in that space. And I loved it. So I've really had the opportunity to work with these big interdisciplinary teams on these complex topics. So trying to gather empirical evidence, not just, think about the policy questions, but really try to gather empirical questions, mostly around how science is represented in the public sphere. It's something I'm really passionate about. So that's really the work that I've done. And one of the reasons I got into it, first of all, I've always been fascinated in this topic, even when I was a kid. but I got into it because, you know, pretty early in my academic career, so this is in the 90s, it became apparent that, you know, the best evidence often wasn't used, right, in the development of policy, in informing the public on topics, as you know, especially in the health space. But we're seeing that, of course, happen, you know, across domains. And you know, I've been fortunate to work in that space ever since, and I really do feel passionate about it. And that kind of led me, no surprise, into the misinformation space, where, you know, right, which is really dominating my research and my writing and in my public speaking now. I mean, think about the topics now that are being driven not just by kind of faulty science, but like straight up lies, right? Straight up lies. And, you know, and I've been working in this space for, you know, a long time, decades, and I've never seen anything like, you know, I see now. Like it's just, it's not stuff that we have reasonable disagreements about, or, oh, we need better science here, or there's gaps in the literature. It's straight up lies, dominating uh, public discourse on science issues.
How do you stay motivated in your efforts to fight misinformation when it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle up a steep mountain all the time?
You know, well, first of all, I feel fortunate uh, for communities like this, you know, like this, right? You know, our community, I think, it's a warm, positive, energizing community. The science community, communication community more broadly, I think, you know, is in general, not totally, but is in general like that. And I mean this sincerely. I think that that really does help keep you motivated. And I think that our community increasingly recognizes that, you know, we need that motivation. So when you're seeing a colleague being attacked by trolls, you know, we come in and we, you know, give support. And I think that that's really important. So that keeps you motivated. The other thing is just I have wonderful colleagues sort of on my team. We're doing really interesting research in this space that keeps me motivated. And it's just a really, I think it sounds like hyperbole, but, you know, I think this is one of the challenges of our time. I think this is one of the greatest challenges we're facing right now. And there's some research that backs up that statement, and you know, public perception research that's done on an international scale. Increasingly, people view the spread of misinformation as really one of the greatest challenges of our time, right up there with climate change, right? And so, you know, that keeps me motivated. But you're 100% correct. The trolls, the hate, the absolutely ridiculous policy moves that are adopted based on misinformation, the impact that it has on our politics, all of those things can be incredibly disheartening. So I do think you have to keep yourself buoyed, and it can be challenging. And the harassment is not fun, right? It can, you know, and it can happen at a very high level, and be, you know, can be really hard to take and can get you down. You know, I like to believe, Rob, I have incredibly thick skin, but, you know, it can get you down.
Yeah, I talked to Volta, and his interview is the last one. I think that's the most recent one that has been released already. And he told me the story of, you know, him being dragged through the mud for his pro GMO active activities. It was so disheartening what, you know, what's been done to him.
It is really disheartening, and oh, you know, I feel for him. Obviously, he's a friend, and I know what he went through. You know, I've been sued by anti-vaxxers. They, you know, contact my university. They contact students. You know, I've run into them on the street. It's really disheartening. And one of the ironies, I think, is what you often hear from that community, right, is that they're being silenced, that they're being censored, that they're being marginalized, that they're being canceled. Meantime, they're doing their best to create a chill across public discourse, to create a
Right.
chill in the information environment and the marketplace of ideas. So there's this real irony going on that in so many respects, they're the community trying to silence people. And unfortunately, Rob, it works sometimes because you have people that just, you know, academics are busy enough. I don't need the hate, the hassle. I'm not going to speak up on this issue. And when that happens, those trolls, right, those misinformation mongers, they win just a little bit. And I even find myself doing that. you hesitate to post something because it's just going to be even if it's a third party study, it's not your study, it's someone else's study published in a reputable journal. You hesitate to post it because of the sea of hate and polarization that is going to occur as a result of it. It's really a toxic time, but we can't give up, Rob. We can't give up. We must forge ahead.
And which is why we need CSICon. So yes, let's talk about your presentation at CSICon. I have the title being The New Wellness BS, Manly, Optimizing Sciency Longevity Woo. So can you tell us what that is going to be about?
That was an ambitious title, I gotta say, Rob.
Look, wow.
I tried to wrap my arms around a lot of concepts there. Yeah, one topic that I'm absolutely fascinated in. In fact, I have a documentary coming out on this October 23rd on CBC. Is this manosphere, right? This manly man, masculinity language that we're seeing absolutely everywhere. Now, as you know, you've worked in this space a long time too. A lot of the alternative medicine, wellness woo has traditionally, not completely, but traditionally kind of been part of the counterculture, often more focused on women, not
I
entirely,
always
but
see that.
often more
Every time
so.
I look into it, it's women for some reason.
And also for a long time, I think it's fair to say, it was part of this kind of new agey, slightly left leaning ethos, right? Not anymore, right? Not anymore. Now we're seeing this. It's become the alt-right. It's become part of this anti-establishment kind of language, and I think that's where you have that commonality between New Agey and the woo we're seeing now. But this other fascinating thread is how it's being, for some influencers, being enmeshed in this new idea of masculinity, of being manly man, right? And so we have people like the Liver King, and we have people like Huberman, and we have people like Jordan Peterson and Tucker Carlson, all of these people emphasizing this idea that we need to have more masculinity. Masculinity is under attack, and how we're going to fix society and how you're going to fix yourself is to be more manly. And so I'm going to talk about why that is wrong on so many levels in virtually every way. Regardless of the direction you come at it, it's probably wrong from an empirical perspective. Before I go on, big caveat here, big caveat. If people enjoy, traditional masculine norms, awesome. I'm not here to judge. There's no right answer on how to be a man or how to be masculine. That's not what I'm judging. I'm judging this, or I'm exploring, investigating this idea that we need more traditional masculine norms in our society. And it's sort of echoing back to a mythical time that never really existed, right? A mythical kind of masculinity that is allegedly ossified as the right kind of masculinity, and that is under attack. And I think that is just both empirically wrong and potentially harmful.
One of the Fox hosts last week, I think it happened last week, at least it started going around the internet last week, the meme of it happening. He said, if you vote for a woman, it means you're turning into a woman.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. We're hearing that kind of language everywhere, right? This stuff I'm talking about now may sound like it's esoteric. It's not. It's not. I mean, this is part of politics now. It's a big part of voting. Even when you think about, Kamala Harris considering who her running mate should be, her VP, which was decided today. You heard people speculating, well, she better pick someone who's kind of manly, to counter the criticism that she's a woman and not tough enough, which is complete nonsense. But that's the world we live in now. And so this rhetoric about this idea that we need more manly men, and if you're not manly enough, it's somehow kind of an insult, is everywhere. And one of the things that's funny, Rob, is, on my social media feeds and in my email, insulting my masculinity, calling me Timmy or little Timmy boy, or a beta cuck or a beta male or a soy boy, is absolutely everywhere, right? And it's just unbelievable that in 2024 people think insulting my masculinity is an insult, right? It's just to the point where it's like a prima facie insult. It's bizarre it's so old timey and regressive, but that's where we are.
I'm looking forward to that talk. So the last talk you gave was, I looked it up, misinformation and the big ideology problem. So do you remember like what that was about? Can you summarize that one? I can put a link into that video so people could watch that because that's already online.
Yeah, that's a topic I continue to be fascinated with. And in some respects, Rob, this one kind of builds on that one, right? Because the masculinity um, rhetoric we're hearing does have very much an ideological component to it, right? So the last one, that talk that I gave a couple years ago, and in fact, Rob, we just got a couple research grants to explore this in more depth. So your question is timely. It's to really look at the degree to which misinformation, health misinformation in particular, because that's the sphere that I work in, has become very closely linked to political identity, right? And of course, vaccines are the best example of it, but there are others, right? And it wasn't always like that. Of course, ideology lurking in the background. Always, we think of a topic like climate change. There's always been an ideological component to that misinformation. But now we're seeing it with supplements. We're seeing it with vaccines. You're seeing it with how you're supposed to exercise and the food you're supposed to eat. It's all become about ideology. And that is problematic for a bunch of reasons. We know that once a belief becomes part of your worldview, part of your personal identity, it can be more difficult to change people's minds. The other reason I think it's important to investigate this is because of the impact of communities and echo chambers, right? You start to just live in this echo chamber, this information environment where these beliefs are reinforced and reinforced and reinforced and becomes your reality. And there's so many examples of that, of course. And the other reason I think this topic is important is it's an opportunity to also to recognize that we're all subject to, buying into misinformation. I know people are probably thinking I'm picking on the right, I'm picking on, conservatives and Republicans, etc. But this happens, of course, across the ideological spectrum. And in the past, not that long ago, in the 70s, it was the Democrats, the people on the left, that were more suspicious of science than the Republicans. So I think it's also an opportunity to pause and remind ourselves, hey, this can happen to all of us. And one of the ways to check against that, and this is from Kate Starbird, the wonderful misinformation researcher from the University of Washington. She said, one of the things you should always do is ask yourself, is that bit of misinformation or does that bit of information, that information content, does it feel like my team just scored a touchdown? Does it feel like, is it playing to my team? And if so, that should be a signal to pause, right? To dig further, right? Okay, I should make sure I got this right. Just because my team is winning doesn't mean it's necessarily true.
We talked a little bit about this last time, and my recollection was you mentioned the correlation, which I had never thought about. You just mentioned anti-vaccination forces, but that they had also become pro-Russia regarding the invasion of Ukraine, which, by the way, 2 years later, still going on. Yeah, I think it had just started then. And that's like, wow, what is the connection there? Why is there a correlation at all? That is so just odd.
Yeah, you're right. And that was Canadian data, right? And so, which even in some respects is, some of our listeners might find that even, because we think of Canada as being not quite as extreme and polarized as the United States. But you're right. And since my presentation, there has been other data that has backed this up. And I think what that really highlights is the impact of those echo chambers. Once you become part of a particular community, these are the things you're supposed to believe. Like you should be a little bit anti-vax. You should think ivermectin works. You should, take supplements. There's this constellation of beliefs that your
That I
community
almost
has
understand
embraced.
going together, but that like take sides in a war where one country invaded another on the opposite side of anyone in that party would have previously done, it's like bizarre.
It is bizarre. It is absolutely bizarre. But if you really want to get, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial myself, but
Go for it.
let's dive down that rabbit hole together. Of course, let's first start with what the empirical evidence says. The empirical evidence does tell us that misinformation often comes from state actors, right? State actors are often pushing misinformation. We've seen it from Russia, from China, from other entities. And by the way, the United States does this too. If you look at the scandal of the United States pushing anti-vax information on China, people are using information as part of sort of the global as part of global conflicts, geopolitical conflicts. And what we have here, and this is me speculating, is misinformation coming from state actors. They don't really care if there's sort of a conceptual consistency to the misinformation. The goal here is to create information chaos, to create polarization, to create conflict. So let's pick topics that are controversial. So vaccines, GMOs, Ukraine, and just create conflict. So I think that's part of the story. I said made it sound like I was going to go down a conspiratorial path, but that's not. I think that speculation is informed by what the research tells us.
All right, so let's get off conspiracies and talk about something that we know is crazy for sure. And I can't talk to you without talking about Gwyneth Paltrow, because I've written about her myself 3 times. Once for my article, my column in Skeptical Inquirer, and twice for AIPT Science. And of course, you wrote that wonderful book about her. So last time we talked about it, and you said that you thought Goop was trying to improve itself to better reflect science. Again, 2 years ago. Where does that effort stand in now in 2024?
Gosh, that was generous of me, Rob. ever hopeful, right? Right, Rob? Ever hopeful. I don't think we've seen much. I don't think we've seen much. You did see that language, that rhetoric, and it seemed to peter out a little bit. So what I find interesting, and I don't know if you've gone to the website recently. I do
No,
go
actually, I have
periodically.
not. The last time was probably right before I interviewed you 2 years ago, and we talked about
Yeah,
some details.
it's the same nonsense. We have
Yeah.
detox stuff there. What they did, I think before that interview is they started putting little tags on their posts about whether it was speculative or whether it was science-based or evidence-informed. And I've followed that, and when they say it's evidence-informed or science-based, it often isn't. They use false balance. There'll be some tiny speculation on one side versus a mountain of scientific consensus on another, and then they'll say the speculation is science-informed. In addition to that, I still think she's being held up as this wellness entrepreneur, and almost valorized by some entities. Or I know there's a CBS interview not that long ago, or talk about it in my next book, where she's held out as a pioneer and being ahead of the curve, right, on things like gluten, and I think it was gluten and cleanses. I can't remember the
Oh,
other. Jade vagina eggs.
oh,
So you still don't see this really hardcore critique in popular culture that she deserves. So I don't think things have really improved, but I will say this. I think her space in pop culture has rescinded a little bit. Like, you're taking a step back. I don't think she's at the fore anymore. And part of that, Rob, is I think it's these manly men influencers that have, think people like Huberman, Jordan Peterson, the Lever King. These people have really, occupied, that space in a more vocal manner than Gwyneth. And it's gonna sound like I'm complimenting Gwyneth, and I don't mean to be, but in the current information environment, the current information ecosystem, the loudest, most extreme voice often wins. And I think these in the manosphere space, you have these completely absurd, very kind of rage-filled content, right? This rage-filled content that's more likely to get eyeballs and clicks than Gwyneth's relatively sedate absurdity. Does that make sense? Does that make
Yeah,
sense? I think,
selling a bottle for like hundreds of dollars with a crystal in the bottom, which is going to imbue your water that you put in there with some magical powers. Yeah, it's not as sexy anymore.
yeah, it feels a little bit tame compared to
Yeah.
the health misinformation that we're seeing today, which is interesting. They've really moved the lens, right? And I think that that's problematic, a problematic sort of phenomenon. Also, our tolerance for bunk, right, has gone up even further. So now here I am saying that Gwyneth isn't as bad as, right? What a sad place to be.
That's sad but true. So also last question about Gwyneth, I think. You told me you had repeatedly tried to interview her without success. Have you given up on that?
I've given up. I've given up. I don't think I'll put it this way. I haven't reached out since last we communicated. And to be fair, I haven't heard her or her team really push back either for people, myself or people like, my friend Dr. Jen Gunter. So yeah, the temperature seems to have come down. And I do think, again, that's because in so many other areas, the temperature's gone through the roof, like it's sun hot. Right? It's
Right.
like, we think about the vaccine wars and the GMO wars, all the bizarre diets and things. It's just gone through. I mean, to give you a sense, in the manosphere, there's what's circulating now that if you eat a carnivore diet, okay, don't do that. You don't need sunscreen, right? And by the way, sunscreen's not manly, right?
Oh
This kind of
boy.
absurdity, right? This kind of absurdity. So, but look, it doesn't make the jade eggs any less ridiculous. So let's not forget that.
I interviewed Rena Raphael, and her interview will come out before this one. She's also a speaker this year. And we talked about Paltrow a bit because she was a follower at one point and she called herself a goop apologist. And so in our conversation, she said that Gwyneth doesn't care about criticism because she perceives any press, good or bad, as good for the brand. I mean, do you see it that way?
A little bit. And her team, and it's not just Gwyneth, it's her whole team. They're pretty good at creating a defensive response that sounds like they're winning. So what do I mean by that? I'm sure Rena, who's wonderful, by the way, her book is wonderful and she's wonderful. And I'm sure Rena might have touched on this. One of their most effective, unfortunately, alas, defenses is women have been attacked. Women are not treated well in the healthcare system. Um, we don't have good research about women's health. It's getting better, but we have a long way to go. All of that is true, right? And that becomes the distracted defense. Of course, all of that can be true, and a jade egg is still absolutely ridiculous, right? It doesn't make the jade egg work. And in addition to that, we're not going to solve the problems of the healthcare system with pseudoscience, right? And the last thing I'll say on this is I actually find it more, it makes me angrier at Gwyneth because basically what they're doing is exploiting for profit a genuine problem with our healthcare system, and exploiting an issue that is causing women and people of color too, by the way, to suffer. They're exploiting that as an excuse for profiting from pseudoscience. So, but it is an effective defense because it's sort of like the Mott and Bailey strategy, right? So, do you know that logic fallacy where
No.
when you have like the Mott and Bailey? So it's the idea is that um, you have the undefended village and you retreat to the castle, right? The Mott and Bailey. So the idea is you have an absurd claim, use jade vagina eggs, and then you retreat to something we all agree on. What, you're for treating women poorly,
Uh,
right? And it's you hear this all the time from politicians, right? Say people who are pushing an abortion agenda. What, you're for abusing children? You're for increased crime? You retreat to something we all agree on, and alternative medicine practitioners do this all the time.
so what do you think is the most dangerous pseudoscience or conspiracy belief currently out there?
Well, my response is going to probably be obvious. I think, I think if you lined up 100 of us who study this, I think most of them will say the same thing. There's a constellation of them, but I think you have to say vaccines. Like the misinformation about vaccines, it's killing people. It's killing people, right? And what's horrifying is it's become completely normalized. The belief in uh, utter, just complete utter lies, right? The idea that the COVID vaccines are causing hundreds, thousands of deaths, right? The idea that the COVID vaccines cause infertility. There's still people who think the COVID vaccines change your DNA. The number of individuals that believe that is incredible, and beyond, and the number of people that just think the COVID vaccines were a failure, like is when they're, this incredible scientific achievement, is even larger. And of course, by the way, no surprise, those numbers are almost perfectly correlated with political affiliation, but that's a story for another time. There's absolutely no doubt that pseudoscience is doing great harm, but we're seeing pseudoscience in the realm of cancer. And I think we just published a study just today on misinformation and cancer therapies. I think that's increasing. It's starting to become politicized too, starting to become embedded in that kind of political rhetoric. I think that's doing great harm. But of course, topics like climate change also, pseudoscience and climate change, that is also increasing and doing great harm. So it's hard to pick just one topic. If I was forced to, I would say the vaccine thing cannot be underplayed.
So since you got on the topic of medicine, I came across a term I had not heard before in something when I was looking up to add things to your bio. Precision medicine, kept coming up. Can you explain what that term means and tell me what its potential benefits or risks are?
Yeah, so precision medicine, this is actually a space I've worked in since the 90s. Yes, I'm old. I think it started, look, precision medicine, the modern term, right? The modern term really is associated with, the more we know about you, and that includes your genomic makeup, perhaps your microbiome, the more precise we can make your treatment and maybe even the preventative strategies that we use on you. And it's a very appealing idea. I think that it's often conflated with the idea that you should know your patients, know the context of your patient, know where the culture within which they reside. All those things are incredibly important. But when people talk about precision medicine, I think they really mean the former, more sciencey definition I just gave. And it really is associated with genomics, but has expanded to things like the microbiome. There's real precision medicine that I think is valuable. I've been involved with the genomic project, for example, using genomic testing, genomic test technologies to ensure that the individual is optimizing transplantation, like kidney transplantation. Is the right person getting the right kidney to optimize outcomes, right? That's precision medicine. But what we're seeing now is sort of the marketing of precision medicine. I think it's become like a health halo. Everything's personalized now, right? It's your personalized diet, your personalized exercise, right? Your personalized sleep approach, your personalized supplements, your personalized shampoo and toothpaste, and on and on and on, right? And there's almost no evidence to support any of that. And in fact, it can be harmful, I argue, and have argued in papers in the past, because it distracts us from the basic things that we can do, not just as individuals, but as a society. Exercise, healthy diet, sleep, surround yourself with people you love, don't smoke and don't drink too much. Those basic things that we know evidence shows again and again make a real difference. And the other reason I think it's problematic is it points the finger at the individual. It says, look, Rob, if you're not healthy, hey, you got your genome scanned. you know what you're supposed to be doing. It puts the blame on the individual. And again, loads of research tells us if you really want to, raise up the population health, this is a population problem, right? And putting blame on the individual doesn't help. And the last reason I'll say it's problematic, although there's others, is it's not really science-based. And I think the best example of that is personalized diets, this idea that you'll get your genome tested and you'll have there's very little evidence to support that. In any best case scenario, Rob, we're talking about tweaking your diet. Is it really going to add to your longevity? Yeah, doubt, there's no good, robust evidence to support that. And by the way, we've been studying this for years and years and years. If it was going to be super helpful, we'd know by now. Best case scenario, it's going to be a niche application. It's not going to create population difference. And so I think that it's often held out as if it's clear that it works, right? And this is what you need to do. And certainly the evidence doesn't suggest that.
I mean, every kind of alternative medicine is presented like that, especially these days. Like, I can't tell how many TikTok videos you're scrolling through. This is what you have to do this. This is what you have to do to solve this problem in your life. It's just presented as if it's an absolute fact from on high, and do this and you'll be great.
Yeah, you're right. And in my position, sort of as a science and health policy person, the bars, the standard for me is quite easy to cross, because for the exact reason you just outlined, what's being presented to the public is not, well, Bob, there might be some evidence this is helpful. You might want to give it a try. If it is helpful, it's going to be just this marginal, tiny benefit you're going to get that, and all the risks in your life is going to get washed out in that noise. That's not how it's presented. It's presented as, this is definitive. If you get cold plunges and infrared
This is the hack.
saunas, you
They
are
like that
going to
wording.
benefit.
This is your life hack.
Yeah,
right?
it's a life hack that's going to make a profound difference. And this, that's simply not true.
So how can people better discern like what sources of information are actually legitimate and what you can rely on in this age of everyone telling you what to do with no evidence?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's getting much more difficult. Even since we last talked, Rob, I think it's gotten more difficult. It used to be, you could respond to that by saying, find a group, a list of trusted voices that are independent and aggregate the science in a responsible manner, so you can get a sense of what the ever-changing scientific consensus is on the topic. You used to be able to say that. But there's two problems with that. Number one, large swaths of the public don't trust those sources anymore. You can't say the CDC, you can't say the World Health Organization, you can't say the National Health Service, you can't say Health Canada, because there's huge sectors of the population, as a result of the spread of misinformation, as the result of the forces of polarization and rage, that they don't trust those sources anymore. I mean, there are a large hunk of the population. We're not talking 2% or 5%. I would guess 30% of Americans take it as a truism, not maybe, a truism, that Fauci is a fraud and evil and did evil deeds. And because of that, it's more difficult now to tell people where to go. The second reason it's more difficult is, I think we're seeing more bad science. We're seeing predatory journals. We're seeing hijacked journals. So it is becoming more difficult to tease out the good science from the bad science. I think there is a knowledge creation crisis brewing that is going to make fighting health misinformation more challenging.
So the hill that we're fighting on is getting steeper, is what you're saying.
It is, unfortunately, it is. I really think we need to do our best to clean up the scientific literature. There are entities like Retraction Watch that really try to do a lot in this space. There are other entities that are trying to explain what the scientific consensus is on a topic, having regard to predatory journals and conflicts of interest, all of those things. And those are really helpful movements. But, I'm really worried that the current information environment, it's very difficult to tease out the good stuff from the bad stuff. Okay, that was depressing, because I still think it can be done. Because Rob, on a lot of the big topics that people care about, how to live a healthy lifestyle, for example, we know the scientific consensus already, right? You exercise, I've said it, right? You exercise, you don't smoke, you drink in moderation, you eat a healthy diet. There's no magic there. You sleep, you surround yourself with people you love. And so few people are doing those basic things that worrying about all this nonsense that people are marketing is just a way. It borders on the absurd. Focus on the big stuff, and we'll all benefit.
Do you see any trends on like trying to end this on a positive note in health law, or that are pointing in the right direction to improve the situation?
Yes, I do. I think that we
Tell
are
me.
seeing first of all, this is a big deal. Like what I'm about to say, more and more research is being focused on this. And I think I'm a good person to comment on this because I've been working in the space for so long. I've been embedded in both the academic literature and kind of the, the public representations of this also. And we are seeing much more research on this topic. In the past, there'd be these small kind of qualitative studies. Hey, I did some of these studies. The ends are small and, you're looking at how things are represented in newspapers. Now we're having these really big, robust studies. It's still hard to study it well. I want to be clear here. It's a complex problem, health misinformation and misinformation more generally, but we are seeing more research on it. We're seeing more research teams. We're seeing people take this topic very, very seriously. We're seeing the SciComm community expand, which I love. You're seeing all these young, bright, creative minds getting involved, really passionate about it. I love that. So all of that, I think, is super, super positive. So despite all the negative stuff I've said, I have hope for the future.
Good to hear. Okay. So have you seen the CSICon speaker list for this year? Who are you particularly interested in meeting for the first time or hanging out with?
This is gonna be really selfish. I'm looking forward to hanging out, seeing Rena, and I'm looking
She
forward
said the
to
same thing. I asked her the question, and you were on the short list.
and I also must admit that a lot of the other speakers, including people on my panel, they're friends. And one of the things I love about this conference is you do see so many friends. You see people that are doing the same work and have the same struggles that you have, and that's fantastic. Often, people like me, we go to conferences and there's be one or two of this phenotype. And it's nice to see a room filled, with people who are passionate about this topic. And I find it super energizing.
Right, great. Okay, so I think this is a good place to wrap it up. How can people best follow your work?
Look, I'm on a lot of all the social media platforms. I'm not on TikTok. I don't have the psychic energy. The other thing I would recommend everyone check out is our initiative, hashtag Science Up First, hashtag Science Up First. We're on that Science Up First is on every single platform, and we make positive, upbeat, science-informed content to counter misinformation on a host of topics, from vaccines to climate change to wildfires to women's health, to abortion, you name it. We cover it, and we do it with positivity, and voices from a variety of communities. And I'm really proud of this initiative. So, check it out. Hashtag Science Up First. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks. I will put the link right here and in my article. So thanks so
so
much for
much.
joining me today again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in Las Vegas in just a few months.
Fantastic. Looking forward to seeing everyone.